Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to allow me to share my thoughts with you this morning. I get often asked to speak at conferences, symposia like this, which are conference symposia on water. The problem is that although I do write a lot about water, I'm not really interested in water. And that will be somehow my point, in a way. Hence the kind of strange cryptic title of my talk, H2O does not exist. Now that's an extraordinary statement to make, of course, in light of what we have discussed, and I will try to explore some of that. What I'm really interested in, so I'm not interested in water, you may be interested in finding out what I'm really interested in, which is social power and emancipatory democratic politics. That's what I'm really interested in. But both of those things are very difficult to say something concrete and material about. Whole libraries have been written about social power, and even more has been written about democracy, democratic emancipatory politics. My argument is that any kind of social power, and consequently any attempt to, through egalitarian democratic strategies, deal with the condition of social inequalities and social power, and the desire to make real the presumption of democracy, which is the presumption of equality of each and every one of speaking being. That's just a presumption. We know full well, socially speaking, that this is a lie. But democracy here promises, assumes that that is true. Now my point is that both of those are always articulated through the materiality of the world we inhabit. And that's why I use H2O, or water, as a material thing, a heuristic device, to use a difficult word, to tease out both the choreographies of social power and how they are structured, as well as to tease out the modalities of democratic emancipatory tactical strategies. So that, in a nutshell, is what I do. My talk is structured around three themes. As first of all, I'm going to say something about what I mean when I say that water does not exist, this kind of outrageous statement. And I'll do that through arguing that, strangely enough, despite the fact that all of us discuss water the whole time as if it is a matter of politics, we actually continuously disavow the political nature of it. In other words, what we do, and yesterday was another example of that, but I go to many conferences like that, we talk about different contested and contestable fantasies of the truth of water. Yesterday we heard two of those competing fantasies, and like with all fantasies, they have a kernel of truth to them. We heard a fantastic story about how we have these great soft technologies. We heard that. We know they exist, those technologies. We also know that they offer a solution. You don't have to be a genius to know that. We've known that for quite a while. And we keep on arguing, we've got to do this. This is where the real politics is, but we say, politics doesn't really want to go with us. So that's the classic example of both acknowledging the truth of something, a fantasy that through technological, particular technologies, we can save the world. But at least those people don't have water. And by doing so, actually disavow, say something not, which is the proper political of that inability to do what is obviously glaringly true. And the same is true, of course, for sanitation and the question of shitting. That matters too, of course. Who would deny that that is not a key issue? But who truly believes that that will save the lives of those people who are dying every day? because they do not have water. Who believes that truly? Precisely. So, we are dealing with water as a symptom, and we should be dealing with it as a syndrome. A syndrome is a characteristic of an illness, a pathology. In this case, a socio-environmental pathology. But one that does not have a simple and singular cause. It's a configuration of things that are usually not talked about. And that's what I mean by water and its discourse as fantasies, which denies the very real political nature of water. That would be one. I think that's particularly important in the present condition. The present impossible water condition that we're in. Because we are in a very difficult situation. And I'll try to explain what that situation is and why it's such a conundrum. To then conclude how we can think about democratic waters so that the phantasmic politics of water really disappears. Because that is proper democratic water. I don't care about water in Manchester. I do not participate, I do not want to participate. Democratic water is water that comes out of the tap, and when I shit it disappears to a pipe. End of story. I don't have time to participate. That is democratic water. That is when I do not have to worry about it. When it's not an issue of concern. And we do precisely the opposite. And that we really have to think through, I think. So that water is a fantasy, structured to multiple sets of narratives that mobilize cultural, technological, policy, governance, and other mediators is obviously true. The literature and the conferences is filled with multiple narratives and fantasies. You know, just a set of images that I like. So we have these kind of endless discussions about what water is. Now just listen to a few. The chemists keep on arguing whether water is H2O or whether it's H9O4+. Because it sticks together. What makes it stick together? Because of some sort of force. The chemists among you know that. Or are we humans hydrophobic or hydrophile? Well, that depends. When I'm in Manchester, I'm hydrophobic. When I'm in Greece on the coast, I'm a hydrophile. Is water public or private? Endless debates. Is it scarce or abundant? Well, ask the people who have been hit by the tsunami 2 weeks ago in Japan, and ask them how scarce water is. In New Orleans. Is it benign and innocent? Or is it threatening? Culpable? Guilty? Is it clean or dirty? Is it mine? Is it yours? Is it ours? Is it female purity? Erotic attraction? Or boys' toys? The mechano-engineering? Or the boys' water mechanics? Is it life or death? Is it divine? As some people argue, well, is it just matter? Should we think a bit about it in terms of hydrological cycles or the socio-hydrological processes? Well, it's a bit of all of that, isn't it? Will the true water please stand up? And I come across these sort of incoherences of what water really is every day. Every day. Both in my academic work, but also I picked up the Independent yesterday when I got on the train in Manchester. And page 31, the desert city in serious danger of running dry. I thought they were talking about Masdar city, or Las Vegas, or Los Angeles, or Tripoli perhaps, since we are now bombing their water supply back to the Stone Age. That's what I would do if I were a commander. That's what they did in Baghdad. Then I turned the page and looked at the picture. You can't probably see the picture there. It's a picture, I've made hundreds of pictures when I was working in Ecuador of this. Someone was talking about that it's private water vending in the peri-urban areas of Lima. Yeah, everyone knows water vending. The desert city in serious danger of running dry. The 1.2 million people in the peri-urban areas of Lima have to pay extortionate amount of money to private water vendors because there is no rain. Because climate change is reorganizing the hydrological configuration of the coastal area of Peru. Is that true? Yes, it's true. I believe what the climate change specialists tell me. Does it have anything to do with 1.2 million people not having water and having to pay extortionate prices? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is no water shortage in Lima. The average availability of potable water by the Lima water company is about 350 liters per person a day. Sort of volume that you and I use. And this is of course the same. Indian drought spoils riots and poisoning. It started about Delhi a few years ago. Come on. We do know that the fact that people do not have access or have an unequal access to water has nothing to do with the climate, nothing to do with nature. That's a fantasy. That's a fantasy. But these fantasies are very powerful. They are performative. It's on the basis of that DFID and other funders give money for institutes like IBS and my own in Manchester. In other words, H2O, water, is an empty signifier whose content is structured through a multiplicity of signifiers. In everyday language, we all tell different stories and put them forward as the true story, and then we have a competition over who will have hegemony, and that we believe then will solve if we win. We believe that is real politics, struggling for the hegemony of the story, and if the story is hegemonized, then it will solve the problem. Not true, actually. Not true, precisely because of the heterogeneity of things that are going on. So what we're doing is thinking through the contested, phantasmic policies of water. We take the public-private debate. Is private water the solution? Well, it depends. It depends. It works very well in some places. There's a nightmare in others. Is public water the solution? Well, it works really, really well in Belgium. In most of the United States, where water is still public. And in China. China is always the classic disavowed country. If there is one that has managed to achieve the Millennium Development Goals and go beyond, over the past 20 years, there's only one that really did that. It's extraordinary what they achieved in terms of sanitation, providing water accessible to most Chinese people. And there's a shitload of them. Yeah? That is an authoritarian regime, corrupt, top to bottom. We all know that. So there is no contradiction between corrupt public state intervention and more egalitarian access to water. Why is it that authoritarianism, communism, China still calls itself communism, where the private sector is allowed in a highly circumscribed manner? Very clear strategy that if we buy Chinese stuff, like this comes from China actually, most of your stuff too, that they cream off, the state creams off a few percentage of the 10% the growth rate. What do they do with it? Provide water, among many other things. And why do they do that? Because they're scared shitless that Tiananmen Square is going to happen again. So we have to think about water as a socio-metabolic process. Think of water as always already embedded in social, policy, cultural and economic configurations, which are inherently contradictory. So let me now quickly try to chart what I think the situation is. And this is of course my fantasy, which is of course disputable, obviously. Not the truth. There are other truths to that. But I do it from the perspective of the presumption of political equality as democracy promises to us. So someone once said, no one ever voted to die of thirst. And José Saramago, the late Nobel Prize winner, literature, Portuguese communist, wrote in an essay on lucidity. If you haven't read it, it's a beautiful essay on the present condition of democracy. It's a story about a city, a polis, where there are elections, and 20% of the people don't vote. And the elites, the political elites, think there's a conspiracy out there. Someone is organizing a campaign. So they try to find the conspirators that do this. Can't find anyone, then they organize elections again. And then 50% don't vote. Disaster. The state increasingly becomes more and more repressive, authoritarian. Because this cannot be happening, there must be some sort of plot behind it. In the book, he says, well, it's because what those in power call democracy today has very, very little to do with what I define democracy, and he and others would do as the presumption of equality of each and every one. That's why Noel Gallagher, the Oasis singer, years back said, there's nothing left to vote for. I'm not going to go through all of that, I don't have time to do this. We know that a water genocide is going on. Not to repeat it, but that's generally done by blaming it on nature, one way or the other. And something that can be rectified through forms of consensual techno-managerial management. It's just a matter of good governance. And that takes place, so this obsession with good governance, whatever that thing might be, it seems to mean that good governance is that you have a table where you put those who do not have water around the table to talk about the fact they don't have water. And when those who are in power say, yeah, that's right, let's talk a bit more, and give you 1,000 quid. But that is done in a wider global consensus, which usually goes under the name of neoliberalization. I don't want to go too much into the contested terrain of neoliberalization, but it basically means that the delivery of all manner of services, health, water, you name it, should not be done by the collective, the public, the state, but by the private sector, according to market principles and with the objective of being profitable. And that should be done in a ring-fenced manner. The state is only there to provide the conditions for that to be possible. And these conditions have to be imposed in increasingly authoritarian ways. I'll give you some examples of that in a sec. Now we have a situation though. So that was the story until about 2005. We're now 2011. The world is a different world today. And we'll say a bit more about the present conundrum, which basically in a nutshell is this. Privatization is dead. It's not, strangely enough, because the World Bank, the IMF, Cameron or the EU do not insist that the state cannot do these services, that has to be the private sector. The private sector who says, we cannot do it. We'd love to. The one thing you cannot accuse the private sector of is that it does not want to make a buck. It would like everything to make a buck. That's its mission. Water is not an easy buck-making business unless under very precise configurations. But now we also have a failing state. Well, not always, because the Chinese state is not failing, the Brazilian socialist state is not failing either, as we heard yesterday. But some states fail. Who made them fail, among others? Yes, there are internal difficulties and problems, etc., but many places have that. China is corrupted too. It is because of a now hegemonic ideology sustained by both us, well-meaning NGOs, and associated academics, as well as by the big international organization. The state cannot do it, the state should not do it, the state fails. What is then left? The citizen has to come to the rescue. That is what one of my colleagues in developer studies in Manchester, Mark Kotari, called a few years ago the tyranny of participation, as the panacea. It's tyranny of participation so that those who are poor, excluded, unequal can participate in how to manage their exclusion and continuing inequality. I wish I was wrong. And we keep on reproducing that. And now applauded by the World Bank too. They wouldn't like to see it any way other. So we're now in the midst of retooling this thing. Retooling what I've called here the Brussels-Washington consensus. And that operates in a highly political configuration. Here, you and I are concerned usually with how can we retool this to make it in terms of good governance. Of course, last month in Dakar, where the World Social Forum was gathered, they don't talk about this in these terms there. And these are really my friends. They talk about it in terms of a universal equality that is predicated upon making sure that everyone is treated equally everywhere. And that requires a massive subsidy and transfer of money and capital. End of story. And that will solve it. Easily. Don't we know? Who says that these days in academic circles? So quickly. In 2005, I was at the Mexico World Water Forum in this fantastic session I'll never forget. It was a session organized by the international financial institutions, who from the podium said, it's up to the private sector to solve the world's water nightmare. The public sector cannot do it and should not do it. It's up to you, private sector. They did their spiel. In the question times, Jean-Louis Chaussat, Executive Vice President Suez, one of the 5 bigs, water companies set up in this charming French-English accent. We would love to invest in water infrastructure, that's our business. We would actually love doing it. But we cannot do so. It is not profitable. Look at our experience. Many of our contracts are not performing. We have to pull out. We have to divest. We need help in order to be profitable. It would be the first one to shout for help. 2 years later, the collective financial sector was shouting for much bigger help. They actually got it. Come back to that. And also Talbot, the chair of Sauer, the other French conglomerate, basically makes the same point. We need public sector participation. What do they mean by public sector participation? That the regulatory framework is fine for private investment? Yes, that too. But that's not enough. They need subsidies. They need support. Where are the the privatization schemes working? Where has the World Bank where is supporting most privatization schemes? In China. In China, with plenty of water engineering companies organizing, building, constructing, managing the water supply system with massive subsidies from a Chinese state that's sitting on a massive surplus of capital. So, this is just a few data on how the hegemonic construction of privatization of the panacea is not working, and we all know that we don't have to go back to that. Most water systems are still public of some sort. You know that. But we're now in a situation also where liquidity has dried up. It's called the credit crunch. You may have heard of this. Yeah? Where there's much greater reluctance from those who are supposed to invest to actually do. Have you tried to get a mortgage recently? See how that does if you're not middle class, with a middle class secure income. And that combined, of course, with the now generally accepted form of new socialism. 2 years ago, Newsweek, in February 2009, Newsweek had on its cover, we're all socialists now. When Newsweek says something like this, I take this seriously. I really do. Because Newsweek was properly speaking the truth. That is, in the fall of 2008, in one weekend, Obama, who was elected, president-elect, the British and European Union mobilized our money, 1.5 trillion. 1.5 trillion US dollars. That's why we're now in an austerity. That's the only reason. All the other stories are bullshit. And we know that. Our students have to pay next year £9,000 for the human right to learn. This 1.5 trillion collectively was pumped into the financial sector in order to make sure that the financial sector could go on with business as usual. Now, the World Bank said that the financial requirements to deal with the world's water problems are gigantic. They're numbered 180 billion US dollars up to 2025 to make sure that the number one cause of premature mortality in the world, the fact that people die before their sell-by date, 75 or so on average, is over, but that will not any longer happen. $180 billion a year. With what we did in October 2008, I could get water to all of them, free of charge, for 10 years. And that's precisely also what the private water sector asks. Give us help. Transfer some funds to us. And then we may be able to service the poor. So the solutions that are now being put forward are basically three. Quickly. There's a movement from direct control to financialization. As you all know, Thames Water, that doesn't only own London, but also Jakarta and many others, is owned not by a multi-utility company, but by an investment company, Macquarie, who also owns the airport of my country, which is the perfect neoliberal country, the country that functions without a state, Belgium. But that only works under very special circumstances. That works for profitable businesses. Those who are not profitable, that is mostly the case. Getting water to these people at affordable price is not easy. It's expensive. It's costly. And it cannot be done with massive transfers from the elites to those. That's the way in which London got its water supply in the 19th century, and every other country by doing exactly that. So this is some of the companies who is important. So the private sector has to do it, but has to mobilize. Has to mobilize public financing to do it. That is the socialism for the elites. But if it delivers water, okay. But that is foreclosed. That is foreclosed. It was great to hear the person from IDF yesterday evening at the book presentation. Applauded greatly. It's very important private small-scale initiative where people take control of their own lives. That's great. That is purely conformed, directly conformed with the neoliberal idea. If you say we need to transfer huge money, let's try to figure out the politics of that. I think I'm going to come back from a very, very cold shower if I were to propose that to different. And I don't think that would anyone get at my conference if I were to try to talk about that. And the third one then is stakeholder participation. And that is all that's left. The citizen to the rescue, which is precisely announcing the end of the political. The end of the political, which is the demand for equality. This was South Africa, this great example, where the human right to water was enshrined and when they got 6,000 litres free. Is that what the people asked for? No. They asked for equality. Articulated around water. It was the subsequent elites who said, started talking about the rights. And defined that in terms of a good governance thing of 6,000 litres. And that's great. And the same is true for the people of Cochabamba. They were demanding equality. Precisely like the people of Tahrir Square. Yeah. So I have to conclude in the final slide. We have to really start thinking out of the water box. And to really think through what the democratic political is. And how watery things, like any other material things, is inscribed in these demands and calls for equality. Equality is something that is taken. Rights is something that is given by the elites. So we may ponder for a moment why this word equality, water equality, is totally scripted out of our vocabulary. Although we would all agree that the very presumption of the great order that we inhabit, democracy, is precisely predicated upon the presumption of equality. I'll leave it to that. Thank you very much.